Buenos dias. Good morning, everyone here in Washington State. Beautiful morning. Today is December 12th of 2021. We had a lot of twos today, huh? We have 12, 2021. I don't know why I'm repeating that, but yes, today is here in Washington State. We're here in Tacoma, Washington. For the people that don't know, because a lot of times I talk to my friends, I tell them I live in Washington, and they think it's DC. No, Washington State, beautiful state, green state, where it rains, but it rains with purpose to keep this state green. So this morning I want to say hello to everyone that is listening to us here in VT Radio Universal. Tune in, or 106.5 One America station. So everyone that is listening this morning, good morning. I hope you're doing well. I hope you're sitting, drinking your coffee. And we're going to talk a little bit about redistricting. And I know I can't say this word for some reason. I want to say just gerrymander, because that's easier, even though that's not what that means, right? So we have a guest this morning. We have Alison McCaffree.
Yeah, Alison
Yes,
McCaffree.
we have her this morning. She's going to talk a little bit about what that means and why is it so important for us to be part of that process here in Washington State. We have a right now ramping up in the United States. In a lot of states, there is a lot of redistricting, where there is really, what they're doing is they picking really the people that they want to vote. So, and it's a little bit complicated, but right now in Texas, there is the Justice Department sued the state of Texas because they're the redistricting, and they keep all the black and brown people from voting, and that is the way it's happening in a lot of states today. So we want to talk a little bit about what that means, and why we need to be involved in this process. So Alison, good morning. How are you doing this morning?
And I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
Forgive me for killing your last name. And also, I for some reason I can't say this word, redistricting. I want to say gerrymander. For some reason I just want to say that word. But tell us
different, so you have to be careful.
Yes. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do, and then we can start talking about why is this so important.
Great, thank you. Yes, my name is Alison McCaffree, and I'm executive director of a nonpartisan nonprofit called Politics of the Possible in Action here in Tacoma. And we are very happy to announce a new fellowship where we're working with high school students to give them a year-long civic experiences, like meeting elected officials and maybe paging at the legislature and those kinds of things. In conjunction with that work, I am the redistricting issue chair for the League of Women Voters of Washington State. And I got into redistricting because I helped my grandmother, Mary Ellen McCaffree, who was a 4-term legislator in the 1960s. She did the first ever comprehensive redistricting of Washington State in 1965. And so I helped her write her book called Politics of the Possible. And that got me interested in redistricting all over the country, but particularly here in Washington State. So I've picked up the issue chair role for the League of Women Voters and have been working on that for the past 4.5 years. And I'm very excited that we educated over 6,000 people on redistricting in the past 4 years. We had speak up schools where people learned to testify. We had some amazing testimony in front of the Redistricting Commission this year. And it's been a very exciting year being a redistricting expert.
And what is the challenges that you have had with the pandemic? What kind of challenges you have? Because I was thinking, a lot of people can be in person. A lot of things are done remotely. So
Yeah.
how is that has changed the game of getting people involved too?
So I think it started with the census because, of course, redistricting uses the census numbers to make decisions about our voting districts. And so the pandemic obviously affected the census, delayed it, and delayed the census numbers coming out almost 5 months late. And that has hurt our state, hurt many states, but it hurt our state in getting our commission the specific information they needed, not until August. There's been lots of interesting juggling because everything was done remotely for public input. And I think it was good in lots of ways that people did not have to travel to give input. Social media was definitely a bigger part of the kind of outreach than it was ever before. But also, I think it's very challenging when you have to know how to use Zoom. You have to get online 7 at night and wait your turn for, sometimes it was 3 hours, if you wanted to wait your turn to testify. So I think it's very challenging. There were people who are tech challenged. There are people who don't have internet access that works. Just the whole knowing when the meetings are and signing up and all of that was a new process for everybody. So I think it hurt us in terms of the number of people who could testify, quote, in person, right? Testify live and verbally. But we were very excited that lots of people gave their input to the Redistricting Commission, either in written or they responded to maps and things.
And I jumped the gun a little bit, but I wanted to ask you, so explain to us what redistricting is and what happens when, and why is this so important to us to...
So redistricting is the redrawing of our voting districts. And the ones I'm most familiar with are the lines for our congressional districts, the people we send to Washington, D.C., and our legislative districts, which are the people we send to represent us in Olympia. There's also going on city and county redistricting at the same time. So you may be hearing of like the King County or Pierce County redistricting at the same time. So redistricting in general is just that process of redrawing the lines. And it's important because it's where your voting power starts. Who you are grouped with makes a difference because that's the group, your voting power is the group that you get to decide who represents you. And we want the most people to feel like they can elect the person they want to represent them. And then that person goes on to work on the issues that you care about. So I really like redistricting because it affects every other issue based on this representation. The people that represent you work on the issues you care about. And you elect people that care about your issues.
I was thinking what you were saying, and it's basically having a seat, excuse me, having somebody that represents us and having a seat in the table when it comes to decisions making in that.
Absolutely. In this country, we have this ideal of kind of we the people, right? Back to our national constitution. And this is the way we've decided to do it in our democratic republic, right? Republic means representation. So we've decided we can't all go, all however 135 million of us all go and have a big town hall meeting. So we elect people that then can meet and make the laws that we live by. So in order to have a voice, we need to elect people we believe are going to work on the issues we care about.
And how critical it is for a community, especially a community of color, because and one of the things that I like to tell people, a lot of people said, I don't do politics. I don't do anything like that. It's not my thing. And is people would just think that it has to do with everyday living. Has to do with the water, like we talking about Flint, Michigan. We have people that represent people in order to have those things like good schools, a tax, all those different things. Yes, it is part of politics. You have people deciding how much you're gonna pay in taxes, what school your kids are gonna go, the water, the environment, all these things. And I think people don't connect those things together. How important and critical it is to the community of color to know that this has to do with your everyday living when you are part of that process.
I think you're absolutely right. It has to do with our everyday lives and those things that affect us. And the truth is that communities of color and poorer communities have been underrepresented historically, and those voices have not been heard. And as you mentioned in your introduction, there are ways historically where redistricting has contributed to those communities not having as much of a voice. And so in order to make sure that doesn't continue to happen, we need everyone involved. We need to say, hey, this is important to me, and I am going to elect people who want to make sure that redistricting is done in the best way possible, because then those people can work for you. They can help get your water correct.
Yes.
They can help. If you're talking about local level, city or county council, they can do street level stuff that's going on in your street. You need a new street light because it's unsafe, those kinds of things. And at the state level, it could be many laws that affect us. Everything from, what kind of unemployment or what kind of licensing we have to get, what car tabs, those kinds of things are decided at the state level. So it's critically important to be involved and to understand who it is you're voting for. And you don't have to be involved in, quote, politics. I hear this all the time. And even though my company is called Politics of the Possible, it's about the possible part of it. And if you don't get involved and know who's running and know what your district is, then your voice is silenced in yet another way, and that's unfortunate.
And I think I don't know. I don't think people connect those dots. I don't think people really realize how important it is. I'm seeing more and more every day how the politics is shifting in a very very dramatic way, and I don't think people realize that today more than ever you need to be involved, because this is changing. We having people that are working fiercely to make sure you don't vote, to make sure your voice don't count, to make sure you don't have a seat at the table. And I don't know if people are connecting those dots. Now, the process here in Washington State to decide our new voting districts, how does that process work?
So we were one of the first states to have a redistricting commission in 1983. And this meant that we took the responsibility for drawing the lines away from the people in the legislature who were going to run in those lines, right? Yes. So you can kind of see the inherent conflict of interest if you're the ones drawing the lines and then you get to run in them. So that's
wow.
why, right? That's the politicians picking
wow.
their So there has been a long-going trend to turn it to commissions that are independent from the legislature. Mm-hmm. We were one of the earliest ones, and Washington decided to have a bipartisan commission. There are 5 people, with 4 of them being voting members and 1 being a non-voting chair. And the 4 are chosen, they're appointed by our legislative caucuses. So House Democrats, House Republicans, Senate Democrats, Senate Republicans. So we end up with 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats on our commission that negotiate the lines after taking public input. And they always convene in the year ending in 1, because we do the census in the year ending in 0. And they convene from January, and they have until November 15th to finish the maps.
I was thinking, so this year, how did we did in this year, and what is the court decision for the process of doing the redistricting in Washington State? So what happened? How did we did, and what was the court decision about it?
So the commission got convened in January, and we did have historic representation on the commission. For the first time ever, we had 3 people who were people of color.
Good.
We had Brady Walkinshaw is Latino, April Sims is Black, and Chair Sarah Augustine is a member of the Yakama Nation. And all of our commissions before had been completely white. So it was historic representation in that way. We also saw a lot of attempt at public outreach. They spent a lot of time trying to understand how to do the outreach over Zoom. They spent a lot of time figuring out their social media and their website strategy and all of that. And so by all the numbers that the commission has published, there was historic levels of input to the commission. Then they got the census numbers and they started negotiating, and in quite a dramatic end on their meeting on November 15th. Now, remember, the deadline was midnight on November 15th, and they started a meeting at 7 p.m. and they immediately went into what they called caucuses, which our understanding was it was two of the voting members meeting at a time. The commission is under one of our laws in Washington State that's called the Open Public Meeting Law, which means they're supposed to be doing their negotiation in public so we can see them. But they immediately met in pairs. And then at the very last seconds before midnight, they held quick votes on an agreement. And it wasn't quite clear what they were agreeing on. The next day, the commission chair announced that they had officially missed the deadline.
Yeah, I remember.
And that they were moving the responsibility as per our state constitution. They were pushing the responsibility to the state Supreme Court. And so then we had 2 weeks of wondering, well, what's the state Supreme Court going to do? Are they going to get a new special master and draw new maps? There was a lot of lobbying to accept the maps that the commission did come out with, but it was a day or two late. They have published their maps. And then on November 3rd, I think it was, the court came out with an order that said they are accepting the commission's maps, and that in their opinion, they did substantially meet that deadline. So it's quite controversial, but essentially the court said we are going to accept the work of the commission that they'd been doing and that they had negotiated. And so we will move forward with the maps that the commission published as the new voting districts.
I heard in the news that they missed the deadline, but it was still accepted. So now what happens now after this court decision? The Supreme Court said this is fine, we're going to accept this map. So what happens after that?
So essentially all the details of the maps, we vote in precincts. And so that's like the smallest little area that everybody has the same ballot. And so all those teeny little details of the thousands of precincts all around the state need to be transmitted to the legislature, to all of the county auditors, who will start creating the process by which we actually do the voting. There is an opportunity for the legislature to amend the maps if they find it's kind of a technical fix because it has to pass by 2/3 of both houses, and it can only be less than 2% of any district. Those changes. And if the legislature does nothing, then the maps still go into law. So they're not really approving them. They are adjusting them if it's necessary. So we start moving down the process of creating all the systems, all our election systems. The auditors create the precincts, then they create ballots, and then we get to vote. And it looks like that process will go forward, and we'll vote in the new districts in November.
And I was thinking, when I started the show, I was thinking about Texas. How did you do that? How do you just make a map and just eliminate a group of people based on their race? How does that happen?
There's various things going on. I want to make sure that listeners understand. There's redistricting, which was drawing of the lines, and then there's also voting ID laws, voting requirement laws that are also going on. So make sure you're separating those out. Because in Texas the legislature controls redistricting maps, so again, it's the people who are going to run in those districts deciding those district lines, right? And one party has control of both houses and the governor. So then it's easy to pass a map that favors that party. And so you're looking at ways in which you can draw the maps that are still equal population, but that favor the person you want to win, your party, in those districts. And so from what I understand, I'm not a Texas expert. From what I understand, in Texas, there was a lot of rural areas that picked up some suburban areas. So kind of the suburban areas around the cities. And in Texas, the cities tend to be Democratic, and then the rural tends to be Republican. And so the new maps have kind of split up the suburbs around the cities to ensure that the Republicans win in those districts. And that's where the Latino voice for sure has been split between, I'm not quite sure about the Black demographics in Texas, but we kind of know that in politics, people of color lean towards the Democrats. So there's this weird balance between, they're partisan, they're being partisan, they're not being prejudiced, and yet the lawsuits will be about, no, this really is about prejudice against these communities of color.
I want people to vote. And I think the population here in the United States, the people of color are growing more in numbers. And I think this particular party is not trying to win these people with the, just to get close to these people and find out they just want to keep power, and they're doing it with all means, everything that they can do in order to not have us participate in this process. And this process of the democratic, keeping the United States as a democratic country. So what is the biggest changes right now in the maps, in the congressional districts here in Washington State?
Yeah, so if you look at the congressional districts, the biggest changes are in the 1st and 2nd district. The 2nd district, which used to be mostly kind of a coastal district from all the way from the Canadian border down to, I think, the King County or the Seattle line. And that has been expanded to include all of Whatcom County with Bellingham and all of Skagit County with Mount Vernon. So that's really been expanded to a bigger district. And then the 1st district, which had a lot of that rural area in the mountains, kind of eastern Whatcom County, eastern Skagit County, eastern Snohomish County, has now been compacted to be just North King County and South Snohomish County, because that's where the population grew the most, was kind of in that North King County area. So you've compacted those. So that's a big difference in those two districts. And then we've seen down here in Tacoma, the 9th district line has been moved to the Pierce County, King County line. So those folks in kind of northern Tacoma have used to be in the 9th, and they will be in, I think they'll be in either the 6th or the 10th. I'd have to look at that again. So that's probably something. The 6th still comes in and picks up a lot of Tacoma. There's little changes. You'd have to see if your congressional district changes. And then the 6th wraps around and picks up some new areas outside of Olympia. We think perhaps that the 6th and the 3rd get a little more competitive, but it's unclear to me at this point how those will play out in the elections.
And I was thinking this is important because next year we have elections for that in Washington state. There's always an election. There's not there's election every year, but this is very important because we're gonna have election next year, and to pick senators and I believe, right? Yeah. So
2022, all your congressional folks will be up for re-election. I'm not sure if the senators are up because they go in thirds.
Okay.
But certainly the congressional districts, the 8th congressional district picks up more of Snohomish County, but it will continue to be a very battleground congressional district for our state, with both the Republicans and the Democrats having the ability to win in that. So the candidates, Representative Schreier will probably run again. And the candidates they'll be battling it out big time in the 8th.
And again, I'm not gonna get tired of saying this to our listeners. I think the local elections are even more important than the nationwide elections because of, again, we're picking people that are gonna make decisions that are gonna affect us directly. So you that can vote, please vote, because this affect us directly, so a lot of times people just do the year of the presidential elections, but we this is important because it affects our everyday living. So I would not get tired of saying that to people. Yeah. Get involved.
This is what they call the midterm elections. Yes. You'll hear that one, and it's because the president is not on the ballot.
Yes.
But we still are electing many, many people.
Yes.
All the way down the ballot to your local city council folks. So I agree with you. It's so important to vote in every election because those people that are in those local races are the ones that can affect you most directly.
And I was going to pick a bone with you, but I know you have nothing to do. One of the things I was talking with Chris, I hear that he's sitting with me, the booklets that they give us to look at the people that vote, it is so hard to read, and it's very complicated. And I think that is something that needs to be changed too. Just use like main basic words. And I was talking to one of the ladies, she was running. I was telling her also, instead of telling us, what you do or who you are, we want to know where is us thinking, what can you do for us instead of just, those books, they show the name of the person, it shows the where they went to school, but that's it. We don't know anything about them. And I think it's also people pick up the book and they don't get it. So a lot of times you don't vote. A lot of times I vote and I have to leave blanks because I really don't know what this mean. Is you cancel, or what is that title mean, and what that title, how it affect me, and what is it does for me, you sitting in this. So I think that needs to be changed, because is you running for let's say the district of 7, what does that mean? What is the district 7, and what does that mean, and how you can figure out if what that person is gonna do. A council city person, well, what is that person does? I prefer. I was telling her that, but I know I'm shifting a little bit out of
Well,
the
and because this is what we're talking about, right? The district, the number you see associated with a person is this district that we're talking about.
So I was thinking in the book, and I'm sorry I cut you off. In the book, that she was explaining what is redistricting means, how it affects our life, and you didn't even have to put that second part, but just tell us what it is. So, and in basic plain words, so we know what that means. So I will say, okay, I'm gonna vote for this because this is what this is. And I think they don't that is not done really well for the basic person that's gonna take that pamphlet and read it and say, okay. Sometimes you don't even know what district you live in a lot of times.
Yeah, so let's fix that. You can always go to the legislative website and put in your address and find out what districts you are in. And so it's quite easy to remember. It's leg.wa.gov, and there's a link on there called District Finder. So that's it. So that's important to know which districts you're in. Now, your ballot will have the people that you are voting for. So the auditors have already done that by knowing which ballot to send you. That's the work they're doing between now and election day. I know when my husband and I sit down to vote, we kind of make it a literal ritual, and we open a bottle of wine and we read through statements, and we talk to each other about who we know and whatnot. We try to just pick one thing each time that we don't know enough about. So if it's what is this? Where is this district line? Or what is this position that we're voting for? What do they actually do? We were looking up port commissioners last time to be like, well, what responsibilities do they really have?
Exactly. That's exactly what I'm talking about. We don't know,
But if you do that, you do one thing each time. Imagine after all of those ballots, and then you vote every time, right? And after all of those ballots, you're going to know so much more. So it's not a big time commitment to just pick one thing that you want to learn more about this election, and then over time you're going to know a ton more about all of the positions and the people. I will put a plug in for the League of Women Voters has a Vote 411 site. And that's information on candidates, where the league asks candidates questions and they respond. So if you're looking for a little bit more information on a candidate that's more directed towards issues and directed towards what they're going to do for you, that's a good option. You can probably just find it on the internet and Vote 411. Yeah, I think this is where kind of the practical stuff meets the theoretical stuff.
Yes.
Because we've got to find ways to make it easy for people to educate themselves, so they feel like they can be part of the process, and that it's this privilege to vote. It's this responsibility to vote, and we make it easy for people to do that. When that ballot comes in the mail, they can say, okay, when am I going to do this? And when can I get it back in the mail?
So because I would sit down and I would go through the pamphlet, and then I would be like, okay, I don't know what this means. What is that person? How is that person's going to help me? And what basically they're running for, what they're going to do. So I think doing that, making it a little bit easier for people to know that probably should be one of the number one things to do, especially the people that makes the pamphlet. I don't know if those come in Spanish, but it would be nice if they have it also in different languages too, so you can read it. And
the Pierce County Auditor actually is quite good at election materials in your native language. So if you need ballots and election pamphlets in a different language than English, you can request that, and they'll get you that. So you go to the Pierce County elections site, and you can, even on their website, you can click, and their website will change to your preferred language. So yeah, that's important for people to know, that there's lots of materials that are available. They have been translated, and they should get those.
So with that, saying that, tell us a little bit about the legislative district. What does that mean, and what is it does for us?
So this is the other map that the State Redistricting Commission decided, which is our legislative districts. And these are the districts where we vote people to represent us in Olympia. So these are our state representatives and our state senators. And we get 2 representatives and 1 senator from each district. So the biggest changes in the legislative maps are in the Yakima area. The 15th and the 14th district were changed significantly. The 15th is a majority Latino district, although there is some controversy over that, and we may see some lawsuits on whether it does meet with the Voting Rights Act. And there's been lots of controversy and a couple of different lawsuits in Yakima around city council and county council districts, making sure that the Latino voters can vote in the people that want to represent them, right? Some other changes were in North King County, South Snohomish. The 44th district changed a bunch. There's some other changes in South King County, where the districts around Renton are getting a little bit more compact, and many of them that were majority people of color have stayed, but others that we thought might change to be majority people of color were not. I'm thinking of like the 47th district in the Kent and Auburn area. In Tacoma, the biggest difference is in the changes in the 27th and 28th. I know where I live, which is on the west end of Tacoma. We have now been switched from the 28th to the 27th. So University Place and kind of the west end of Tacoma has been moved into the 27th. I think that makes the 28th higher percentage people of color district, including the 28th includes the the base, Fort Lewis McChord, and the 29th remains a majority people of color, kind of in central Tacoma along I-5. And people should go look at the maps and see if the district where their house is has changed.
And one of the things that I'm thinking, I'm listening to you, and I said all of that has to do with the census. Like they look at the amount of people, right, that live in that area. So it has to do and the demographic of the people that live also in the areas like Yakima, that right. is basically a big part of Washington State where a lot of Latinos live there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's based on the census numbers. We've seen growth in urban areas, and so a lot of the city districts are shrinking geographically. And then the rural districts tend to get slightly bigger geographically to pick up more of the suburbs and whatnot. And there's some decisions about how those population shifts are accounted for in the maps. So it is based on the census. And then particularly when you have a large group, either racial or ethnic group, our Voting Rights Act at the federal level and at Washington State Voting Rights Act means that representation of that group has special rules around it to try to make sure that those people can vote in the person they want.
So you were saying that there is challenge. They're going to challenge the 15th district. That is the one in Yakima. What kind of challenges what is the problem and the controversy in that and in the 15th?
Yeah. So the controversy is whether the 15th district, as it's drawn, represents the Latino community in the area. Can they vote in the people they want? And Voting Rights Act legislation, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not giving legal advice. I'm simply a voting rights enthusiast and follow these things. But voting rights cases can be very complicated in terms of proving that there is a pattern of racialized voting, i.e., Latinos vote a certain way and whites vote a different way. And so you prove that there is that pattern, and then you prove that the way the districts are drawn prevent that group of people, Latinos in this case, of being able to elect in the person that they want. Often, historically, it's been Latinos voting for Latino candidates. Mm-hmm. We know there's also some interesting dynamics with the Yakima Nation, which, from my own personal conversations, has a tie to the Latino community in Eastern Yakima. And the way the districts are drawn now, the Yakima Nation was given their request in that the reservation itself is all in the 14th district. And the 14th includes most of Western Yakima, which tends to be more white people and higher income folks. And Eastern Yakima is more of the Latino folks. And Eastern Yakima has been put with Pasco. So it kind of goes over the counties and picks up the Latino population in southeastern Pasco. So it is a majority Latino district, but it can be argued that those are two different communities, the Latino in Eastern Yakima and the Latinos in Pasco. And so we shall see. I know there are some groups talking about lawsuits, and we'll see what happens if those get filed and how those proceed through the courts.
Now, we was talking yesterday, and you told me something about there is a lawsuit. I don't know if you can talk about it, or you can do that.
The one that got filed late last week is by a group called the Coalition for Open Government. Uh-huh. I apologize if I got that wrong, but and they are a group that is specifically concerned about the transparency issues of the Redistricting Commission. This idea that they worked in pairs and they were kind of behind the scenes. They weren't on the public Zoom meeting. They, as I understand it, their suit files that was against Open Public Meeting Act rules, and therefore they should be disciplined, and there should be some other remedies around preventing a future commission from acting in such a way so that this suit is about specifically increasing the transparency of the negotiations of the commission, and this lawsuit is trying to find remedies for that.
Well, I was thinking, and that's the first time this happened. And we're talking about a pandemic, so I mean, we have the pandemic. Yes.
So it's interesting that we had to adjust things because, we can't all go to an in-person meeting. That's not safe. But we did successfully have Zoom meetings where the media and advocates like me and other interested parties could show up and listen live They were live on TVW to the meeting, and that is where typically in other commissions, other public meetings, that's where they're having their negotiations. And it just didn't happen the way many of us thought it was going to happen, in the public view on that public Zoom meeting before. So there is some updating, modernizing our rules around the commission, which the League of Women Voters is all in favor for, knowing that Zoom meetings and are just going to be more of the way of the world now, and kind of streaming access and those kinds of things. So we just need to make it clear what the rules are, and maybe update the commission rules, and certainly strengthen the training around Open Public Meetings Act so that commissions know what they can and can't do in terms of their negotiations.
Are these maps or gerrymander? Did you know there's any?
Yeah, gerrymandered can be in the eye of the beholder, and this is.
And tell us a little bit about gerrymander before you go in. This is the name of this guy that for some reason they put the name as we don't know why, but yes, tell us a little bit of what is gerrymander.
So this is where it's important to use the term redistricting, because redistricting is the process. It's part of the voting process. So voting isn't good or bad, right? It's just the process. Redistricting is the process. Gerrymandering is when you bias those maps to favor one party or one group. So that's why it's important to be distinction. If you say gerrymandering, you're saying somebody has favored somebody, right? The maps have favored this or that. So what tends to happen, and I think it's happened again in these maps, is that we have a political negotiation. We have 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans, and so they're doing this push and pull for different districts. So we don't have a polarized bias map like in some states where they have one party control. And believe me, both major parties have done it.
I have done it. Yes.
Right. And I'm bipartisan. I'm nonpartisan, so I know that. But so if you have a true state map that's gerrymandered, that tends to mean that the whole the chamber, so your House or your Senate, is biased such that majority party wins easily or more easily. And what happens in Washington State because of this negotiation is we might get districts that the parties can win more easily, but overall, there are both parties can win many districts. So we tend to not have as many competitive districts because of that, because they're trying to find their own. And it's really an interesting push and pull behind, is competitiveness the characteristic that we want, or is, in the league maps that we did, going with what the communities of interest, what the communities wanted, we put higher than competitiveness, although competitiveness is one thing that you look at when you are drawing the maps. So because of all the criteria we use in our state law for drawing maps, they're not ranked. So different commissioners could put different criteria higher or lower than the others. So I think we have, if you had to say, we probably have some districts you could argue are gerrymandered at the district level, but I don't think our overall maps are, quote, gerrymandered.
And one of the things that I was thinking, like, we talk about the state of Texas, but it's also happening in Michigan and Colorado and Virginia. So what is going on in these states when it comes to redistricting?
So there's lots of different stories. I kind of highlighted those states. Michigan has, for the first time, had a citizens commission doing its maps, and they've put out their draft maps. My understanding is they put out their draft maps, but their final maps aren't done yet. So it's really interesting to look at Michigan to see how a citizens commission, which is not, so I said, like we have basically political appointees that are deciding the maps. A citizens commission is everyday voters who
that is even better.
They decide they want to be part of this, and they get selected, and there's a process for people getting selected. And then this group of everyday people supported by a staff that knows the technical details get to decide the maps. So it'll be really interesting to see how Michigan's maps reflect the will of the people, and if people feel like those maps have better representation than the maps that were decided by the legislatures. Wisconsin is a state where the Republicans are in control of the state legislature, and so there's been lots of tension. When a Democratic governor came in, they're trying to decide how they're going to do redistricting and pass reforms and all of that. So that'll be interesting on how that tug of war plays out. Most of the court cases in the past in Wisconsin have been against the Republicans gerrymandering for their favor, and therefore winning more of the state house, control of the state house than the overall vote in the state would be. It's a very purple state, but the Republicans tend to win in the House. They call it the Assembly. North Carolina, I didn't have on my list, but it just made the news because the North Carolina Supreme Court decided to push out their elections so they could decide 3 of the lawsuits against the process or against the maps. I'm not even sure right now, against the maps that are decided. So that's interesting. So we're watching court cases, we're watching redistricting commissions. Of course, the Department of Justice court case against the Texas maps is one we're watching. And we'll be digging into.
And we have Virginia and Colorado too.
Yeah.
Colorado.
So Virginia had a very public redistricting commission process for the first time, and they couldn't decide. So it got kicked to the Virginia courts. So we'll be watching how that plays out in Virginia, because they wanted this commission to work, and then the commission couldn't decide, and so then it goes to the court. So we'll see how that plays out. That was more interesting when our courts hadn't decided yet. We didn't know how our courts would decide. And then Colorado, their process I'm really interested in. For the first time, they had a commission and they have one of these everyday people commissions that for both their congressional and their legislative maps. And they had, I know reading some of the Colorado League of Women Voters information, they had tons of people that were viewing the commissions. They called them the observer corps or something, where people were following the process very in a lot of detail. So I'd love to dig into that process and see what kinds of things we could put in the Washington state process that would be helpful and modernize the process.
I was thinking about the citizen committee that you were saying that was a Michigan, because I'm thinking, how do the people, legislators that are running for, how is that even possible, permitted? Like, I mean, how do you? So I'm thinking, what Michigan did by appointing somebody in the community or somebody that has no affiliation with any party work on this. Why is this not something that should be a rule? And
there's definitely some bills in Congress. HR 1 has some redistricting commission rules in it that, if that got passed, would make it a commission like this mandatory. We see commissions like this in California, Michigan, Virginia, and maybe one other. And Michigan did a big people's public campaign to change their state constitution. Mm-hmm. And it's quite an interesting story how they got enough grassroots movement behind it to get it on the ballot and then pass it in the ballot. In Washington State, we cannot change our state constitution, which it would have to be to change our commission. We would have to change our state constitution. Mm-hmm. And to change our state constitution, we have to pass it through the legislature and then pass it by a vote of the people. And so that's a big ask, right? We got to get our legislators to write a bill, to send it to a vote of the people. And so we really have to let our legislators know that that's what we want in order to change the commission structure.
Yeah, and you were saying in Michigan there was a big grassroots effort, a lot of people that just participate to change it. You know, I think every state has like a little country by itself. It has its own Supreme Court, and but I was thinking certain things should be nationwide. Should be this is in this part of legislation or in this part of the process. It is the way it's supposed to be, because to see people that are making the rules when they are the ones that are running for that, it's like, you know, you're gonna definitely human nature. You're gonna make the rules to favor you. I mean, that's just nature, right? Human nature.
I think this is an interesting push and pull about the way our country was set up. That we do have 50 independent states, right? We're the United States of America. And that we have this tension between federal rules and state rules, right? And we, I think it's a good thing that we have remedies at the federal level and we have remedies at the state level. That's our two different court systems. That some people don't understand, that we do have those two different court systems. And that helps us because we can in redistricting cases, the federal Supreme Court has said they don't want to decide partisan gerrymandering. And so now if we want to try to sue against partisan gerrymandering, we have to go do it in state court.
So it is a state. They left it to the state to decide what they want to do when it comes to that part.
And in Washington State, the words in the law are fair and effective representation. And so those are the words that we want to define in a legal sense to make sure. And we want, as advocates, we want people to get riled up. Yes. You want fair and effective representation for yourself and for your community.
I was thinking behind the scene, I'm thinking about voting, and I'm thinking of the League of Women of Voters. I'm thinking of that, and listening to you and how behind the scene my son is 24 years old, and he doesn't like to vote for the local elections. He doesn't. And I'm thinking how important our vote is, that we have people behind the scene working to make sure we vote. And then we have people behind the scene making sure we don't vote. Certain people don't vote. And I don't think people realize how important it is to vote when we have people right now working to see how they can get our vote, to see. And then another group that say, no, we don't want them to vote. I don't think people realize how much and how important it is to be part of this process of voting, because we literally have people working to see a certain group of people don't be part of that process. And then we have also people that fight for us to vote as women. I'm thinking for us to vote as people of color, and it should be in your mind, thinking when you have that privilege, you're going out and vote. I don't know if people see it that way, but I do see it that way. I should be out there, and you should not be blocking me to vote, because there's a lot of people that fight for my right as a woman and a woman of color to be part of that process. So I'm thinking in Washington State, what can we learn from the experience in these other states? What can we learn not to do, or what to do when it comes to Michigan and Texas and Virginia and Colorado? What is we want to do? Because I was thinking it would be nice to have a citizen participating in this process and being the person, instead of having people that appointed by politics, right? I'm thinking, so is you get somebody that wants to participate, there's just a randomly a person that just wants to be part of this process.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. The looking to the other states that have different kinds of commissions than we have, and seeing how that process has been executed, right? Like, how do they pick their folks? What was the process for negotiation? How were they staffed? I mean, we learned this year that it's a lot of work to staff up a commission, get the technology right, and work on the maps. So how do we support a process in the long run that will allow commissions to be successful, and that the public thinks they're successful, and all the legal, you don't have lawsuits because you followed the law in the way most people think it is. So certainly watching how the courts are defining the rules around redistricting this time will be lots of lessons learned for us, digging into the processes of those states that have commissions that are different and have more everyday people on their commissions. How did they support them? How did those everyday people feel about being on the commission? And then what were the results of their maps? And did people feel like they were represented by those maps? I think it's really important to learn from our folks around the states and really rally in Washington State for what people want. I'm really interested in having those communities stand up for themselves if they're feeling their voices aren't heard, or feeling that they're not being represented in some way. Then we need to find ways for those voices to be heard.
I'm thinking about the voters' rights. Right now, there is a tug of war about that voting right that was, I think it passed in 1964, right? It was 1964 or 63.
Yeah, 1965 was the national.
1965, yeah. So, and this is a fight for making sure people of color vote.
Yeah, certainly out of the civil rights movement in the early 60s, you see Martin Luther King at the signing of the Voting Rights Act, right? And yet it's a law that has certainly a little while ago
I think it was
there was this part of the Voting Rights Act that got struck down
by the Supreme Court.
Yeah, by the Supreme Court, which was called pre-clearance. So that was where, back to redistricting, that was where, because redistricting is part of our voting process, any new change to a redistricting process had to be pre-approved by the Justice Department or the courts. And that part got struck down. So now we're seeing in certain states that were under pre-clearance before, they don't have to get that. So they can pass new redistricting laws, they can pass new voting laws, and implement them. And we have to, different entities are suing against that practice, but they don't have to go through the courts before they're implemented.
So how has that affected the way we vote and for color and brown people?
Affected. We definitely saw a lot more voter ID laws come up. We saw a lot, and I'm not an expert in this area. People should definitely research it. So it allowed more changes to our voting system,
and no rules to make those changes. They just can come up and change it.
And so. But the essence, the Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act is the essence that we were talking about, which is discrimination in voting. And so a lot of lawsuits are centered around that. Is there a group of people that are being discriminated against because of the way the law is set up? And that's true with redistricting as well.
So, correct me if I am wrong. So, but every state has a voting law act, or it's just
it's just the federal Voting Rights Act, and then I know California has one, and we have one. There might be a few.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about that. I said,
it was a big deal when Washington State passed our state Voting Rights Act, because so few states have a state level Voting Rights Act. So again, we were talking about those two different court systems. You sue in federal court about the federal Voting Rights Act, and you can sue in state court about the Washington State Voting Rights Act.
So when it is that passed, the local, the state?
Not too many years ago. I'm gonna get it wrong. So like 2019 or something. Was our Washington Voting Rights Act. So 3 or 4 years ago. And so we haven't seen the effect of that
Washington
yet.
State.
We've seen a little bit at the local level. You've seen cities and counties being queried about their voting process. So you've seen a little bit of that based on the state law. But again, I'm not a legal expert in this area, so
if we didn't have this voting act, pretty much the state can decide and implement and change the rules whenever they want, for whatever they want.
Well, this is a statute, so it's a state law. So any changes to that have to go through the legislature. But because it is now state law, if you think your rights are being violated, you can go to the court system and try to get a remedy.
Like this group from the beginning that is I have a lawsuit for more transparency from the committee.
Right. So we have an Open Public Meetings Act, which is law in Washington State. And so they're saying, hey, this group didn't follow that law, so we want a remedy against that. And the courts then decide about that lawsuit.
So, and I'm thinking, so this is basically, how did Washington State decided that they wanted to have their own voting rights act? So
I don't know the history of it. I know there were many voting rights activist groups, including the League of Women Voters, that have been mobilizing to get a statewide Voting Rights Act. You'll have to have somebody else on who was actively involved in getting that passed. But it's interesting. I think it was because we are a state that is is very pro voting rights, and so we're one of the few that has mail-in.
Like for 10 years now, right?
And we keep more. we keep trying to increase access, like the fact that you can turn your ballot in without postage, right, is another way that doesn't get access and those kinds of things. So I think
and Alison, let me add that a little bit of let's say put my opinion on that answer, because I'm proud to say that I was one of the protagonists of that story, because When America is one of those organizations that was like really active on that, and one of them, the one that probably most celebrate when the governor signed that law. I was actually invited to the ceremony. It was in a place in a school close to the airport. So I was there. I got pictures. But it was a lot of work, and it was a combination, like Alison said, of many organizations, big and small. But it was like a lot of effort from the people, and a lot of I will say lobby days. So from ordinary people like us. So, but so now we have it. Yeah.
Like it was 2018 when it passed.
Right. Yes, you're right.
So I'm thinking of that because I'm thinking like we are run like our own little country, like our own little, that in a way is a good thing, in a way is a good thing because we have rules and boundaries that keep us in check to make sure that everybody participate in this process. So I am happy. Again, I'm going to go back to when I started. I'm happy to be a Washingtonian because we are trying to make sure that everybody here in Washington State participate, that everybody their voice is heard and they have representation. So, I would think that you would want that for every state, and these is a part of the Voting Act that was struck down by the Supreme Court. You think you would want that more transparency and people of color to participate more in the process of this that we call the United States of America.
I think we honor the people who have come before us that work so hard to advance voting rights and to understand the needs of our communities by making it even better, right? By not settling for what we've got and saying, how can we make fair and effective representation even better? How can we get more people to vote and more people to participate?
And it feels like we going backwards when it comes to nationwide. We going backwards. I'm thinking of the League of Women Voters, that there was a time and that we as women can vote, and to go back to that nationwide, where there is literally states are trying and doing stuff behind the scene that we can see to stop people of color based on gender, color, to not have a voice on the table.
Yeah, so the League of Women Voters was started 101 odd years ago when women first got the right to vote. And I want to recognize that it wasn't all women when it first happened, because we still need to work on making sure all women of color, all people have access and whatnot. I think we honoring the people that came before us, right? Mm-hmm. By continuing to push and have a voice and be involved. And being involved doesn't mean you have to drop everything. I think we need to have more people doing a little bit than the people, we love to have advocates and leaders. But if more people did a little bit, then we wouldn't have the big hurdles to overcome, mm-hmm. because everybody would be involved, and all that little work, even if it's 5 minutes talking to your neighbor about, that thing on the ballot that you didn't understand.
Yes.
That is being involved. Talk to your neighbor, call up somebody. Yazmin, you're going to call me next time and ask me a question about something you don't understand. Maybe I might know the answer, right?
Yes.
Those 5 minutes add up. And if all of us did that, then we'd be so much stronger as a total community.
Yeah. And I don't know. I think people don't. I'm worried, and I think I told you that yesterday. I'm worried of the way this whole democratic project, this country that is, to me, is one of the. It is one of the best countries. I'm a foreign, and I would not have the life or immigrant that I have here that I had from my home. So when a lot of people like me can see the signs, and I think a lot of Americans don't think that we can end up in a autocratic or dictatorship country, because there's no way that can happen here in the United States. But like you said, being involved and just putting your little grain of sand will help and keep everybody in check for that not to happen. So we have a couple minutes. How much minutes we have, Christian? We have a couple minutes. What would you tell people how and why they need to get involved? Like you said, even just looking at that pamphlet and trying to figure out what does that mean? How is that person that is running for city council is connected to me? What decisions that person make or does that would affect me directly? What would you tell people about redistricting? How is that affect their life, and how important it is to be a part of the process? We don't need a big group of people. Well, we do, but we need more people that are involved. Like you said, everybody doing a little bit, everybody doing their own part will keep this democratic project in check, and make sure that is balanced for everybody, that everybody that live here has a voice in the table.
Yeah, when you were talking, I was thinking about being a positive example for other folks, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you worry about the big picture, right?
Mm-hmm.
Be a positive example, at your dinner table, and then in your neighborhood, and then in your city council, right? Have that positive example of voice and representation at the littler levels, and then it grows. And so then if Washington State can be an example for the nation, then we've got something, right? But it starts from that kernel of talking to your neighbors, being involved, understanding what's going on, and just doing something, every week that educates yourself or helps someone else learn about the process. Or, you were talking about being an immigrant. Like, how do those people know what the process is? So maybe something, you can teach it to somebody else, right? Keep talking to your neighbors, keep talking to your community about what's going on, and think about it as neighborhoods setting an example for the broader community, and then it will spiral and it'll be a positive force for good and change.
I was thinking what you were saying. I know I have a couple minutes, but my late ex-husband, he lived here he was born, he's American, born here in the United States, lived here his whole life. His first time he voted was when he was 30 something years old. Mm-hmm. And as soon as I got my citizenship, And I said, as soon as the next voting election, I'm going to vote. And I did. And that sort of pushed him to vote for the first time. And basically, after that, he got involved in politics. We do bank phones to call people. We went home to home in Tacoma to help register people. And think about what you're saying. That's exactly, what happened. He didn't believe. He didn't believe in the process. He didn't think that his vote count or it even matter. But me, I came from another country. I got my citizenship, and I said the next election I voted, and that just changed the way he became part of the process.
Yeah, that's a great example of how one person can influence another, and then the two of you probably influenced a couple of other people, right? And now you're on the radio talking about it, right?
Yes.
Listeners. So that's that positive reinforcing that I'm talking about.
And mind me, we husband and wife, and I voted for Republican at the first time, and he voted for Democrat.
You don't have to.
That's crazy, right?
Right?
Yes.
I think it's really important to maybe disagree, but still engage.
Yes. So
somebody said disagree, but not be disagreeable.
and it is your choice. Whatever you decide to do is your choice, but just be part of the process. That's basically what we want you to be part of the process. Well, our time is cut short. Thank you, Alison, for this morning, for getting up early, being sitting here this morning, and just telling people that you need to just try to be somehow. I mean, Christian is a perfect example too. That he was part of that collective of people that decided that we are going to have write-in votes here to ensure that everybody is part of that process. So I want to finish by telling you thank you. Have a beautiful, beautiful Sunday. And thank you. And also, Christian, thank you for sitting up here with us this morning early. He gets up on Sunday and come here, sit with us.
Con mucho gusto. My pleasure. Thank you, Alison.
Thank you, Alison. Have a good day. And thank you. Happy holidays, too, for you.